Welcome, divine creations, divine marvels, children of God. So, Bruno Groening was very emphatic, very clear that we need God. That, as he said, we cannot raise ourselves up, and the German also means exalt. And he said, only God can help us. But he also said that we need to have confidence and believe in ourselves. So that's a paradox I've been sitting with, is this, on the one hand, Bruno Groening said, I am nothing, God is everything. And on the other hand, he said that we need to come to self-recognition and self-knowledge and to really believe in ourselves. So I've been sitting with this for a while. What I've come to realize is that when Bruno Groening talks about that we need to believe in ourselves, he's not necessarily talking about the self that we take ourselves to be. I don't believe he necessarily means our personality or our nationality, the things that we normally identify ourselves like. Hi, I'm a 46-year young American male living in California. This is my work. This is my hobbies. I don't believe that the way that we normally think of ourselves or identify or talk about ourselves. Like if someone said, "Who are you?" How would we respond? Probably something like what I just did. Well, this is what I do for a living. This is my name. This is where I live, my age, my gender. But I don't think that's what Bruno Groening meant when he said believe, to really believe in ourselves. I believe he's talking about something deeper than that. Well, what's deeper than that? Well, first we need to remember that Bruno Groening pointed out that we are not the body. It's a very common idea in the world that if you ask, for example, if someone asked me, well, who are you? And I just gave the answer that I gave before. Well, I'm this 46-year young male that lives in California, and this is what I do for a living, and this is what I do, and this is my name. All those things are associated or connected with my body, this body. Yet Bruno Groening said we're not a body, or we're not this body or our body. So if we want to have faith in ourselves, or we want to trust in ourselves, we need to dig a little deeper. And for those who have looked at other spiritual traditions, of course, this idea is not, while it might be a little bit new to the Western world, this particular idea that we're not a body or the body is the foundation of many Eastern traditions or other mystical traditions, or even just many modern spiritual traditions. And yet it is in another sense very radical to reflect on, to take seriously, because we spend almost all of our time doing things, taking care of this body and doing things with this body, through this body, to this body, and thinking about our life here in this body. And yet, I believe Bruno Groening is calling us to something deeper. So then Bruno would talk about something that on the one hand, we've all heard the word before, but do we really know what it means? He used the word soul. That we are a soul and we've been given a body. I believe this is the aspect of us that Bruno's calling us to reflect on, to come to trust in. And then we can begin to find the link between trusting in ourselves and trusting in God, or trusting in ourselves and recognizing our need for God. So Bruno Groening made the revolutionary statement: not only is God everywhere, but God is in everything. Now, it's very easy to to say God is everywhere. It can be a little bit more challenging to say God is in everything and everyone. It's kind of, you know, humanity has had this idea for so long that God is up far and away in this distant place looking down on us. And Bruno Groening brought it a little closer, saying God is everywhere. Okay, we can. It's a jump, and it was certainly a jump for me to start to think, well, maybe God is a lot closer than I thought. But then Bruno takes it even deeper, even closer, and says God is in everyone, in everything. That gets God really close. In fact, can it be any closer? Not that I can really think of. If the divine is inside of us, and to my knowledge, Bruno never, he didn't go into, deep theories and deep abstract philosophies of what that means. He just said that God is in everyone and everything. Now here's where it can get a little paradoxical, a little tricky, but also not. And then Bruno would say things like, well, God is in everyone. And then he would say, only God can help us. And that we need to be connected to God. Now, with words like that, it's very easy for us to, so let's backtrack for a moment. So, there's this idea that God is up in the sky and far and away. And then we start to accept, well, actually, God is all around us. And then we start to accept, oh, God is within us. And then we hear Bruno Groening say things like, to be connected to God, that is everything, or only God can help us. We have to be careful that we don't then, statements like that, then we can fall into the habit of putting God up and far and away. And so, how to connect to God? Well, Bruno gave us this very simple practice of tuning in, of Einstein, of observing our body, having the will, the intention to take in divine energy for our body, and that through this simple practice, he said the truth will reveal itself in our own body, that our own body will convince ourselves of the truth. So again, here we need to be really careful, as we do this practice of taking in divine energy for the body, that we don't then put God up and far away. And it can be easy to do so because that's the predominant idea of God on this planet now, and probably has been for quite a big long part of human history. Maybe we can think of it a little bit like air. Like this body needs to breathe in air. And yet the air is all around us. It's closer than close. And then Bruno used this very interesting German word, Verbindung, which is translated as connection or to be connected. And I don't think that is exactly what Bruno Groening meant. Um, unless we think of connection as really deep, close connection. Like when you look into someone's eyes, you feel deeply connected. Or when you feel really heard, or, maybe after an argument, then you come to a place of understanding. It's really this sense of deep closeness, not separateness. And that's part of what this German word Verbindung means. Union, communion. There's a little bit of background noise. Please let me know if it's too much. Oh, it's very loud. 1 second. That's the thing about doing live broadcasts, is they're live. You never know what's going to happen. So there's a lot of talk in spirituality around this topic of non-duality, and this idea that everything is one, and um, some teachings go so far as to say that us as individual souls and God are not only separate, but in some mysterious way one and the same. And there's all sorts of different views and opinions, and so I just want to put forth what Bruno Groening says, which first and foremost, Bruno's philosophy is so practical. He doesn't go into a lot of speculation or a lot of abstract or deep philosophy. I find his teachings to be so deep But what they are is they're deep in their simplicity. And so, Bruno, on this topic, so in essence, what we're talking about, and now I realize what we've been talking about from the very beginning of today, is how close are we to God? The religion I grew up in is we're completely separate. Like, God is up there, I'm down here. And then even before I found Bruno, I'd found this idea that God is all around us. I'd heard the idea that God is within us, but I wasn't quite really able to accept it. Um, and so Bruno Groening's, so this is a dialogue that humanity has been having for quite some time, is how close or how distant is God? And Bruno Groening's um, contribution to this dialogue is to say, God is all around us. And actually, God is within us. And he went so far as to say that in our soul, there is a divine spark which is pure and remains pure, that nothing can taint it, nothing can touch it. Even the most, what we might call, from a human point of view, the most evil person has this divine spark within them, has, as Bruno Groening said, God within them. And so the question is how to really realize that and how to live that. Well, what Bruno Groening seemed to do and seemed to call us to do was to be humble. And this is a great mystery which I wish I could say I fully understood. But you see it in the teachings of Christ, you see it in the teachings of Bruno and other places, this idea of being humble before God. And certainly, not humbling ourselves before other people, but certainly not putting ourselves above other people. And that in this process of making ourselves humble before God, through some great mystery, that helps to reveal the closeness of God. That helps us to experience union, communion with God. The word Verbindung, one of the meanings is link. And I just have this image of, when something is linked to something else, it's a very intimate. It also means to join. Verbindung. That's the word I was looking for. A very intimate joining. And then there's this paradox that the way that Bruno primarily teaches us this is how to experience this and live this is humility. We read yesterday, I'm not sure if I'll be able to find it right now, but he said, Bruno in essence said, if you want to help, you have to realize how much you need help. And then you have to receive that help. And then you'll be in the position to help someone else. Bruno Groening said of himself, I am only a tool of God. It is not about me. So here we're up against the mystical paradox is that in, or the spiritual paradox is that um, to find ourselves, we have to lose ourselves. And that's not my phrase. People have been saying things like that for quite some time. It's almost um, hmm, like we have to empty ourselves out to make room for God. Like if there's, I think this, I want that, I am this, I am that, then there's not so much room. There's not so much room for God. There's a Zen Buddhist story that I really appreciate that I think really speaks to what we're talking about. And this person heard about a very enlightened and wise Zen monk. So they traveled long and far to go visit them. Um, and then when they got there, the monk very warmly invited them in, and the person began asking the monk questions. The person who went to visit the monk was very well studied, and said, "Well, this sutra, a Buddhist text, this sutra says this, and this commentator on that sutra said this, but then this commentator, just went on and on and on, asking all these questions and quoting all these sutras and asking questions and not really listening to, waiting for an answer. And then, the Zen monk was just preparing tea, and then started pouring tea into the visitor's cup, and then the cup got full of tea, and the Zen monk just kept pouring. And so the tea is now spilling out on the floor and making a mess. And the visitor's like, "What are you doing? What's going on?" And the Zen monk said, uh, "A cup that's full cannot receive." And so personally, that's been one of my deep challenges on this path is um, I, before finding Bruno Groening, I had read a lot and studied a lot and thought a lot. And so obviously now I do that a lot less. And I mostly just reflect on Bruno's things, although I still look at other things, but to really come before God and take Bruno's words seriously, that he in essence said most people don't know what's true anymore, and most people don't know what's good or not good, what's good and what's evil anymore. So to come before God and just, empty our vessel, really say, I don't really know much. And not just opinions about spiritual things, you know, even our political views. And then it gets even more intimate than our identity, our very identity. It's not that we have to forget our life story, but you hear this phrase, and I think it's very accurate. We're very identified with our story of who and what we are. So to come before God and say, I don't even really know who and what I am. I don't really know what life is about. I don't really know who and what you are, that which made me. And then to really open ourselves and, you know, And it's not so much that we're going to get verbal answers. And we need to be very mindful of this phenomenon called channeling, which Bruno Groening was very critical of, saying that, more often than not, it's in channeling being receiving messages from disembodied spirits, literally just spirits without a body. And Bruno Groening, you have to be very careful of that, because it's very often, he said, an evil spirit that's trying to deceive. But the idea being that we can, if we empty ourselves and humble ourselves before God, we make room for something new. If I walk around being like, well, I know what's true, and I know what I am, and I know what life is about, and I know this and I know that, and we might not think it like that, but having that attitude, the know-it-all attitude, which I'm very familiar with. But then if we can just empty ourselves out and even just temporarily just put things aside and come into the present, then we create a little space for God to work, for God to speak, or to touch, or to heal. And again, it might not, I'm not necessarily talking about speech with words, though certainly people have had very profound um, guidance from God in that way. Bruno Groening said, people have withdrawn from nature, going over to culture. That means people have raised themselves only to be lowered. So this is the kind of superiority that part of the superiority I've been referring to. Like, we don't need nature, we don't need God. That's very prevalent, and sadly prevalent in this day and age. There is this sense of, isn't human civilization great? Isn't technology great? And so there's this sense of, oh, we've raised ourselves above nature. But Bruno points out that in doing that, we've actually lowered ourselves and created something that he himself said just can't go on. He said it can't go on like this. But to do something completely different, we have to make the great turnaround in ourselves. We have to be willing to get humble and be humbled. And hopefully not be, hopefully get humbled. And if we don't get humble, we will be humbled. Bruno said, the person who, I'll have to paraphrase here, I don't know if I can find it. The person who puts himself above other people will find themselves on the floor in no time. Whoever puts himself above others will be lowered, and it will happen in no time, and he will be prostrate on the floor. So hopefully we can humble ourselves so that we don't have to be humbled. So that was a little talking. Now let's do a little listening to God. And it can be tricky. This is the what I was calling the spiritual or mystical paradox. It can be tricky to be like to have this sense of, well, God is within me. How do I humble myself before God? And Bruno gives some pointers about reflecting on ourselves and recognizing when we fall short, and admitting to ourselves and to God that we've done wrong. Those are some very simple, straightforward ways that we can get humble. So let's spend a little time in silence approaching God. And again, even to talk about these things, approaching God doesn't necessarily make sense, given that, according to Bruno, God is within us, and yet it's just part of the path. That in getting humble and in approaching God, in seeking God, that we actually find. So let's spend a little time in silence doing that, humbling ourselves before that which made us. Seeing if, just like Bruno, actually that all we are is tools of God, are instruments of God, if that's what we are in truth. All right, divine creations, divine marvels, children of God. We'll be doing this again in a little, let's see, in about a little over 2 hours at noon my time. I'd like to thank everyone so much for joining in, and I wish you much experience of the closeness of God. Take care. Much love.